Let's see some class. Look at this. So I flip this to L2, and then I bring this to 1, and fire. Now look at that. 5, fire. 6, 8, fire. 9, fire. Okay, vertical thing. Final round.
Look up in the sky. If you've lived long enough, you remember when the sky was just blue. Not this weird haze with lines that stretch, spread, and hang there like a film over a city. And the moment you ask, what is that? You get the same reaction every time. You're crazy. It's just water vapor. Don't be a conspiracy theorist. But here's what Tucker Carlson just said in that clip. It's always the obvious questions that are most aggressively discouraged. Why is that? And that right here is why we're here. I'm Wolf Kage, and this is Wolf Kage Los Angeles, and tonight we're debating if something is going on in our sky. We're asking a much simpler question. Are you spraying anything over us with our tax dollars, without our consent?
The chemtrail conspiracy theory is the erroneous belief that long-lasting condensation trails left in the sky by high-flying aircraft are actually, quote, chemtrails, consisting of chemical or biological agents sprayed for nefarious purposes undisclosed to the general public, period. Believers in this conspiracy theory say that while normal contrails dissipate relatively quickly, contrails that linger must contain additional substances. Those who subscribe to the theory speculate that the purpose of the chemical release may be solar radiation management, weather modification, psychological manipulation, human population control, biological or chemical warfare, or testing of a biological or chemical agent on the population, and that the trails are causing respiratory illnesses and other health problems.
Did you catch that? Wikipedia didn't describe the issue. It diagnosed you as crazy before the conversation even started. They didn't say, here's the data, here's the science, here's what's been tested. They said, erroneous belief, conspiracy theory, believers say. That is not science. That's psychological warfare. You see, real science invites questions. Propaganda punishes them. And when the same system that told you the jab was safe and effective turns around and tells you not to notice the sky over your own head, yeah, I'm going to ask a few questions.
To explain what are these lines in the sky that we have all seen?
There's sprayed particulate dispersion. There is no theory in this equation. Bottom line is, when we have up-close film footage of these aircraft at altitude, KC-10s, KC-135s, C-17 Globemasters, with nozzles visible turning dispersions on and off.
Now, he's not talking about feelings. He's simply talking about footage. Up-close video of tankers, nozzles visible, trails turn on and off like a switch. That is not random condensation behaving oddly because it's Tuesday. That is an engineered process.
Geoengineeringwatch.org is the only entity that has taken a NOAA flying lab, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration flying lab, top scientists in it, to sample what these heavy aircraft are emitting at altitude. That sample was processed at Rensselaer Polytechnic in New York, one of the world's most renowned testing institutions. We found exactly what we knew we would find, starting with aluminum nanoparticles. Bioavailable freeform aluminum is toxic to all life, period. That element is named in numerous climate engineering patents as part of a geoengineering dispersion element. So again, there's no theory involved in any of this.
So let's get this straight. They put a flying lab up there, sampled what's actually coming out of those jets at altitude, and sent it to one of the top testing institutions in the world. What did they find? They found aluminum nanoparticles, bioavailable, freeform, toxic, not just to humans, toxic to all life. They didn't find dirt. They didn't find pollen, not fog. Aluminum, the same thing, named, and climate engineering patents. Now, here in Los Angeles, we already choke on car exhaust. We already choke on port pollution, wildfire smoke, and smog trapped by our own mountains. The idea that we might also have a layer of metal dust hanging over the city, that should bother you. That should bother you no matter what party you voted for.
Global climate science community says we need to deploy immediately to slow down the warming of the planet. Stated purpose to deflect some of the sun's incoming thermal energy. We know these programs, not surprisingly, are making a bad situation worse, not better.
So you're calling this geoengineering. The term,
That's a science.
the term chemtrails, you say, is a propaganda term designed to discredit people who ask sincere questions about what the hell am I looking at. So,
Correct, because if they Google that term, they'll get what you got. And that's what we try to avoid. If anybody is unfamiliar with the issue and they Google that term, that's the end of their search, most likely.
Now, this is important. Very, very important. You see, they want you stuck on the word chemtrails because the second you say that word, they've already got a label ready for you. Conspiracy theorist. Next. So, what does the scientific community call it then? Solar radiation management, stratospheric aerosol injection, cloud albedo enhancement, climate engineering. And while they're telling you it's all fantasy, those same terms are in patents. They're in academic papers. They're in government discussions. So here needs to be the rule going forward. We're using their language and demanding our answers.
So we try to point chess, semantics matter in this case.
okay, so the first line of the Wikipedia entry points out something true, which is that when you look at these lines in the sky and you're told, well, it's just condensation, it's water vapor, you know that maybe that's not the right explanation because water vapor dissipates and doesn't remain in the sky for like 20 minutes after the plane leaves.
Exactly correct. If you see, for example, breath condensing, if you see some researchers in the Arctic and their breath is condensing because it's very cold, do they get a cloud starting to form over their head? If you have a vehicle that's exhaust is condensing in the morning, you have a freeway with giant clouds hanging over it from the condensation from the vehicles in some cold region. No, that's not how condensation behaves.
So let's just use common sense for a second. If you go outside in the cold and breathe out, your breath doesn't turn into a cloud that hangs over your city for 20 minutes. If millions of cars commute every morning in the cold, we do not see a grid of white lines stretched across the freeways hovering over LA like some kind of spider web. Condensation disappears. These trails do not. The science you're being told requires you to ignore what your own eyes see every morning on the 10, the 405 over downtown LA. That is not science. That's not science. That's a script.
And I was losing on some days from what these aircraft were emitting 50, 60, even 70% of my solar uptake from what these aircraft were emitting. I knew that could not be condensation. When I began to research, I was very surprised at the mountain of information on geoengineering, solar radiation management. And I looked for primary elements. I began to test my precipitation. I hoped I would not find these elements in my rain because I knew if I did, it would change the entire course of my life. I cannot look the other way. I came up with 7 parts per billion in my first rain test over the next 18 months because I took that long in researching before I was willing to speak out on this issue. At the end of 18 months, I had single rain events with 3,450 parts per billion of aluminum in my rain. This with the nation's weathermen, National Weather Service, and NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. There is an illegal federal gag order on all agency operations with those two entities. Why would our government feel the need to gag the weathermen? I had a NOAA scientist state to my face, quote, "We all know this is going on. We have no First Amendment protection. We don't know what to do. We have aluminum, barium, strontium, manganese, surfactants, polymer fibers, graphene, all of this coming down in our breathable air column, Tucker."
So let's walk through this. The guy lives off grid. His solar output drops up to 70% on certain days because of whatever's in the sky. He tests the rain, first test, 7 parts per billion aluminum. A year and a half later, 3,450 parts per billion from the sky. He keeps testing with a major university. They find aluminum, barium, strontium, manganese, surfactants, polymer fibers, graphene. Meanwhile, there's an illegal gag order on government weathermen. NOAA, National Weather Service, telling them to shut up. Now ask yourself, if nothing unusual was happening, why would you need a gag order on the people who watch the sky for a living?
So who's doing this specifically?
Ultimately, all roads lead to those who print the money. But we know, as far as the coordinating entities, certainly DOD, DARPA, and we have documents to prove the existence of these programs going back decades, documents hundreds of pages long. We have an 800-page U.S. Senate document from 1978 outlining the scope and scale of these programs then, specifically calling for intergovernmental cooperation. All military tankers and all commercial aircraft are equipped with what's known as a high bypass turbofan jet engine. That's a jet-powered fan. 90% of the air that moves through that engine is not combusted. So by design, that engine is nearly incapable of producing any condensation trail except under rare and extreme circumstances, which are diminishing by the day because of the warming that's occurring in the troposphere.
So Dane says the coordinators are things like the Department of Defense and DARPA. There is a 1978 Senate document already outlining weather modification at scale. The U.S. military has 3 times more aerial tankers than all other militaries combined. And on top of that, the modern jet engines we're told are making these permanent sky stripes are actually designed in a way that makes lasting condensation unlikely, except in very, very, very rare conditions. So we've got the money printers, we've got the defense agencies, we've got the tankers, the patents, the medals, the gag orders. At some point, you have to stop calling that a coincidence and start calling it a program.
Tucker, they're being used as a form of warfare. And we know that. We have countries like Iran, constantly demonized, of course, as you well know. Immediately after 9/11, we have the list of countries to be targeted given to General Wesley Clark, a list that clearly existed before 9/11 even occurred. Subsequently, every one of those countries, every one of them was endured a once in 1,000 year drought. Statistically, mathematically, that's impossible without climate intervention operations. And we have the leader of Iran on the floor of the UN, on film, on the record, stating NATO was cutting off their precipitation. We have Iranian top scientists recently stating NATO's been doing this for 40 years, destabilize the food supply by destabilizing the rain, and you destabilize the population.
No hurricanes this year. And you're saying that that's not an accident. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that we know the technology exists to steer storms of that size. And let me make a comparison. You could have a 10-year-old child divert the course of a 100,000-ton freight train by pulling a lever, literally, and changing the tracks.
That's correct.
And that's the kind of small input, massive output that you can have with these cyclonic rotations when they have the ability to manipulate atmospheric pressure zones. This is undisputed, patented science. So why would we think they're not using these type of operations?
Operation Popeye? Is that what you called it in Vietnam?
Correct.
What?
Correct.
I've never even heard of that. I'm embarrassed to say. What is it? What was it?
Very easily researched historical record. U.S. military was so successful at controlling precipitation over Vietnam that the international community was very concerned about this, at least on the surface. And they passed environmental modification treaties in 1976, international treaties forbidding weather manipulation in wartime.
So this is where it stops being weird sky stuff and becomes geopolitics. Countries on America's hit list just happen to get 1 in 1,000 year droughts. Their leaders accuse NATO of cutting off precipitation. The U.S. already admitted modifying weather in Vietnam under Operation Popeye, and it worked so well, the UN had to create a treaty against weather warfare. Think about Los Angeles right now. Engineered droughts, sudden, once-in-a-lifetime heat waves, wildfires that explode out of nowhere and burn like they were soaked in fuel. If weather can be weaponized abroad, tell me, what makes you think it can't be managed here at home.
We're down to single-digit percentages of pollinators left right now. We know insect populations have declined. This is terrestrial and aquatic insect, 80 to 90% globally. Tree cover has declined since pre-civilization baselines, 66%. 66% gone. The remaining 1/3 is dead and dying. Trees, we've changed atmospheric chemistry so much. Forests do not smell like forests anymore.
So here's where it hits you in the gut. Because this is not just about lines in the sky. No, it's not just about bees collapsing, insects disappearing, plankton down up to 90% in some oceans, 2/3 of global tree cover gone, the rest dead, man, dying. In LA, we see it too. I'm looking right out the window at trees, street trees that should live 100 years, browning out early. Wild areas burn hotter and faster every season. Our air feels harder, it feels drier, it feels more artificial. Understand, if the base of the food chain and the lungs of the planet are both collapsing, nothing else you argue about online matters.
We know now from peer-reviewed study the downwind fallout from the Nevada nuclear bomb detonations killed no less than 700,000 Americans. That's peer-reviewed study. How many people know that? So again, they don't care about the consequences of what they do. We know as far as biological testing, according to the Washington Post, as of 1977, U.S. military had conducted no less than 239 open-air biological tests on innocent, unknowing civilians.
So for anyone thinking they never do this to their own people, let me remind you, remember when nuclear tests in Nevada poisoned their own citizens downwind? Peer-reviewed estimate, 700,000 deaths. The U.S. military conducted 239 open-air biological tests on unknowing American civilians. That is not theory, that's historical record. So when people say they wouldn't spray anything over us, they already have.
And again, that's irrelevant. What's setting the template for these fires to burn with such ferocity? And that is definitely climate engineering. And I'll leave it with this. We found a 140-page U.S. military document, which we posted, titled Wildfires as a Military Weapon. Within that document, 17 sites were named in the U.S. as study zones. LA was one.
So Dane mentions a 140-page U.S. military document literally titled Wildfires as a Military Weapon. 17 locations inside the United States were listed as study zones. Los Angeles was one of them. Think about that when you watch neighborhoods like Lahaina or areas here in California burn in ways firefighters say they've never seen before. Drought can be engineered. Wind patterns can be engineered. Fuel dryness can be engineered. And if you can engineer all three, you can engineer fire behavior too. So when LA goes months without rain and the foothills turn into tinder and the winds kick up just in time for a spark, we should at least be allowed to ask, is any of this being helped along?
This is also shocking. Have you spoken to elected officials about this, members of Congress?
Many, and I continue to, and many know. I've had private meetings with Gavin Newsom at this California state capitol, his top aide, and not that that individual would ever do anything for the common good. He wouldn't. He's there to serve those who have him on the end of their strings. No response there. I have on my desk.
I'm sorry to interrupt. So you actually said this or a version of this to Gavin Newsom, the governor of California?
Yes. And in fact, and what I conveyed to Newsom also, if these programs were allowed to continue, because I was focused more on the state of California and the impact here, that the drought catastrophes in California would be catastrophic. I supplied data, which he didn't try to dispute, because I've had meetings with California Energy Commission scientists as well, air quality scientists. You know, California's been concerned about, of course, the lack of precipitation, which affects our hydro power production, also affects Hoover Dam, H Canyon Dam. But if your listeners looked at presentations I gave well over a decade ago, engineered drought catastrophe, target California, everything I said in those presentations back then is more relevant now than ever. Presented that data to Newsom, and the drought has continued, which they're not even disclosing now. Even in Northern California right now, they show zero drought. That's a blatant, glaring statistical falsification. It has never been drier here in regard to soil moisture and fire fuel moisture. They're lying about everything.
Now, here's the thing. Dane said he sat down face to face with Gavin Newsom. Face to face with Gavin Newsom in Sacramento and laid all this out. Laid out the drought data, precipitation patterns, fire risk, and got from Gavin Newsom nothing. No pushback, no debate, just silence. You know what this tells me? Not that everything he says is automatically true, no. But the people in power know enough not to want this conversation on camera. Now let's bring this home. If you're like me and you're in Los Angeles, we already deal with smog, ports, refineries, insane asthma rates in kids, wildfires that smoke out the whole basin, heat waves that turn the city into an oven. If on top of all that, there is unacknowledged spraying, nanoparticles in the air and rain, weather steering that worsens drought and fire risk, then this isn't a climate debate. This is a non-consensual experimentation on a major American city. And that should cross the line for everybody. Left, right, independent, apolitical.
That how can we have any legitimate discussion of climate, anything, from any perspective, without first and foremost addressing this elephant in the equation? And that narrative is much more productive at building bridges instead of burning it.
I think the first step is to let people know the facts that you just laid out and to have a public debate about it. It always begins with words, anything good.
So here's the order of operations, in my opinion. First off, transparency. What programs exist? What's being sprayed? Who, most importantly, authorized it? Then we need independent testing. Air, rain, soil, verified by multiple labs, not just agencies with gag orders. Then, of course, we need public debate. We need scientists, pilots, engineers, environmentalists, and yes, the people like you, the people like me, who actually have to breathe this every day in cities like Los Angeles. I was going to say you cannot, but they cannot lecture us about climate responsibility while they're secretly seeding the sky over our heads.
That's a fight for life right here, right now.
Yeah. Are you spraying chemicals into the air without telling me using my tax dollars? Simple question.
So that's where we'll land this. This is no longer about labels like chemtrails or who gets called crazy on Wikipedia. No. It's about one simple, nonpartisan, grown-up, mature question. Are you spraying anything into the air over us without telling us? And then on top of that, using our tax dollars to do it? If the answer is yes, then someone needs to be held criminally accountable. If the answer is no, then show the data. Lift the gag orders and stop punishing people for asking obvious questions. I'm Wolf Kage. This is Wolf Kage Los Angeles. Stay alert, stay grounded, stay unwoke, and don't let anyone ever shame you about noticing the sky. Out.